I never imagined that a single piece of paper tacked to my front door would ignite one of the most satisfying acts of revenge I'd ever experience. But there it was, fluttering in the early spring breeze, a wedding invitation, not addressed to me, but boldly declaring my historic family home as the venue for a stranger's nuptials. At first, I assumed it was a bizarre prank, a misunderstanding at best. The crisp cream-colored paper, embossed with delicate gold lettering, was far too elegant for a casual joke. The names, Emily Prescott and David Winslow, meant nothing to me. Yet, according to this audacious invitation, they planned to exchange vows in my backyard in exactly 3 weeks. I stood frozen on the wraparound porch of my grandmother's Victorian farmhouse, my morning coffee growing cold in my hand as confusion gave way to disbelief, which swiftly morphed into white-hot anger. My name is Daniel Carter, a 38-year-old architect who had recently returned to my hometown of Brookhaven, a quaint but increasingly gentrified town nestled in the rolling hills of the Midwest. I'd come back to restore the family estate after my grandmother, Margaret Carter, passed away 6 months prior. The property was no ordinary home. It was a sprawling 5-acre parcel that had been in our family for over a century, a testament to our lineage and a living archive of my grandmother's passion. Margaret, a renowned botanist, had transformed the grounds into a botanical masterpiece, with gardens that had once graced the pages of Home and Garden in the 1980s. Heritage roses, native wildflowers, and meticulously planned pathways made the estate a local legend, though it had fallen into disrepair during her long illness. When I inherited it, I took a sabbatical from my architectural firm in Chicago, driven by a deep need to honor her memory by bringing the property back to its former glory. The farmhouse itself was a Victorian beauty, with intricate gingerbread trim, a steeply pitched roof, and a widow's walk that offered sweeping views of the surrounding countryside. But it was not without its flaws. The roof leaked in 3 places, staining the plaster ceilings of the upstairs bedrooms. The plumbing groaned and sputtered, a temperamental beast that required constant coaxing. The gardens, once vibrant, were now a tangled mess of overgrown perennials and invasive weeds. Yet beneath the neglect lay the bones of something extraordinary, a legacy I was determined to preserve. I plucked the invitation from the door, its heavy cardstock creasing slightly under my grip, and retreated to the kitchen, a cavernous room with original oak cabinetry and a cast-iron stove that hadn't worked in decades. Sinking into a chair at the worn farmhouse table, I studied the invitation again. It was addressed to a Mr. and Mrs. Robert Langley, presumably guests, and listed Carter Gardens as the venue for the Prescott-Winslow wedding, complete with a date, time, and RSVP instructions. A phone number was printed at the bottom, along with a website for additional details. The audacity was staggering. My home, my private sanctuary, was being offered up as a public event space without so much as a courtesy call. I dialed the number, my jaw tight. After several rings, a harried voice answered, Prescott-Winslow wedding, Emily speaking. Her tone was dripping with artificial sweetness, like honey laced with saccharin. I took a deep breath, forcing calm into my voice. Hello, this is Daniel Carter, the owner of the property listed as Carter Gardens on your invitation. There seems to be a misunderstanding about your venue. Oh, you must be calling about the parking arrangements, she interrupted, her voice breezy. Don't worry, we've arranged for guests to park along Elm Street, so your driveway won't be blocked. We're very considerate about these things. My patience evaporated like morning dew in August. No, Miss Prescott, I said, my tone flat but firm. I'm calling because you've scheduled your wedding at my private residence without my permission. I own this property, and I've never agreed to host any event. The silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats, heavy and taut. When Emily spoke again, her sweetness had vanished, replaced by a sharpness that could cut glass. This is ridiculous. I've already paid the venue fee to the Brookhaven Heritage Association. Everything's been arranged for months. The Carter Gardens is a registered historical venue. It says so right on the town website. I suggest you sort this out with them. I pinched the bridge of my nose, a headache blooming behind my eyes. My property is not registered with any heritage association, I said, enunciating each word. It's my private home, and I've never given permission for events. There's been a mistake. Emily's laugh was sharp and derisive, slicing through the phone line. Well, I have a contract that says otherwise. I suggest you take it up with Patricia Evans at the HOA. I have 200 guests coming in 3 weeks, many from out of state. This venue will be ready. Before I could respond, the line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in stunned silence. The Brookhaven Homeowners Association. The name alone made my stomach churn. I wasn't a member of any HOA. My grandmother had deliberately purchased this land because it fell outside the boundaries of the adjacent planned community, Brookhaven Estates. She'd valued her independence fiercely, a trait I'd inherited. I opened my laptop and searched for the Brookhaven Heritage Association. Within moments, I found an official-looking website showcasing several historic properties available for wedding rentals. There, prominently featured, was my grandmother's house, listed as Carter Gardens, Victorian elegance for your special day. The description waxed poetic about mature gardens, a picturesque gazebo, and a charming farmhouse preserved as a community treasure. Recent photos of my property, taken without my knowledge or consent, accompanied the listing. My blood pressure spiked as I scrolled through images of my own backyard, the gazebo I'd been meaning to repaint, the rose beds I'd planned to restore. The site listed Patricia Evans as the booking coordinator, with rental rates starting at $4,000 for a basic package that I recognized Patricia's name immediately. She was the president of the Brookhaven Estates HOA, a woman I'd met shortly after moving in. She'd appeared on my doorstep with a folder of community guidelines, insisting they applied to my property despite its independent status. I'd politely but firmly explained that my land wasn't part of her jurisdiction, then tossed her glossy folder into the recycling bin. Clearly, she hadn't taken the hint that I threw on a jacket, grabbed my keys, and drove to the HOA office, a sleek brick building in the heart of Brookhaven Estates. The development was a study in curated perfection. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and houses painted in a narrow palette of approved colors. It was the kind of place where individuality went to die, and I'd always been grateful my grandmother's property remained free of its grasp. Inside the office, a young receptionist with an elaborate French braid and a name tag reading, Brittany, greeted me with rehearsed cheerfulness. "Welcome to Brookhaven Estates. How can I assist you today?" "I need to speak with Patricia Evans immediately," I said, making no effort to match her tone. "It's urgent." Brittany's smile faltered. "Do you have an appointment?" "Ms. Evans is in a meeting with the Spring Planning Committee." I leaned forward, placing both palms on her desk. "Tell her Daniel Carter is here about the unauthorized use of his property as a wedding venue." "I'll wait." Her eyes widened, and she scurried off to relay the message. 10 minutes later, I was ushered into a conference room where Patricia sat at the head of an oval table, flanked by 4 others whose expressions ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. Patricia hadn't changed since our first encounter. Her blonde bob was immaculately styled, her navy blazer pressed to perfection, and a string of pearls gleamed at her throat. She looked every inch the queen of her domain, but her ice-blue eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as I entered. "Mr. Carter," she said, her smile tight and not reaching her eyes. "What seems to be the problem?" The false concern in her voice made my skin crawl. "The problem, Ms. Evans," I replied, keeping my tone even, "is that you're advertising my private property as a wedding venue without my permission, taking money for bookings, and allowing strangers to plan events on my land." A ripple of whispers ran through the room, but Patricia's expression remained unchanged, as if she'd been expecting this. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said smoothly, folding her hands on the table. "The Carter property was added to our Heritage Sites program last year. Your grandmother, Margaret, signed the agreement herself." She nodded to a man on her right, who slid a document across the table toward me that I picked it up, my eyes immediately landing on a signature that was supposed to be my grandmother's. It was a clumsy forgery, dated 3 months before her death, when she'd been in hospice care, heavily medicated and physically incapable of signing anything. The signature lacked the distinctive flourish she'd used, a looping M that I'd seen on countless letters and checks growing up. "This is forged," I said, my voice low but vibrating with anger. "My grandmother was in hospice on this date, barely conscious. She'd never have agreed to this, and you know it. She bought this land specifically to avoid HOA control." I dropped the paper onto the table as if it were toxic. "I want all bookings cancelled immediately, my property removed from your website, and any funds returned to the people you've defrauded." Patricia's smile hardened, taking on a predatory edge. "That's quite an accusation, Mr. Carter. The agreement is legally binding, witnessed by 2 board members." She gestured to the man who'd handed me the document and a woman across the table, both nodding solemnly. "Your grandmother understood that maintaining a property of historical significance requires community support. The Heritage Sites program ensures that." A woman to Patricia's left, whom I recognized as Linda Thompson, owner of a luxury boutique in town, chimed in. The program preserves Brookhaven's character while generating funds for property upkeep. It's really in everyone's best interest. I made air quotes with my fingers. I've received exactly $0 for upkeep. And I never agreed to any arrangement. Where has this money been going? The uncomfortable glances exchanged around the table spoke volumes. Patricia cleared her throat, adjusting the already perfect pen beside her notepad. There's been a reserve fund established, of course. We were planning to approach you about necessary improvements once you'd settled in. The previous bookings were made during the transition period after your grandmother's passing. How many? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Excuse me. Patricia blinked, her composure slipping slightly. How many bookings have you taken for my property? Linda jumped in, her tone conciliatory. Just 3 this season. The Prescott-Winslow wedding this month, and 2 more in June and July. All very tasteful events, I assure you. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. I'll be speaking with my attorney about this immediately. In the meantime, I suggest you start making phone calls to explain to these people that you've been selling access to property you don't own or control. I turned to leave, but Patricia's voice stopped me at the door. Mr. Carter, I strongly advise against making this difficult. Brookhaven Estates represents over 300 homeowners with significant influence in this community. The Heritage Sites program has been very popular, bringing tourism dollars to local businesses. I turned back slowly, meeting her gaze. Is that a threat, Ms. Evans? Her smile was as brittle as thin ice. Simply a statement of fact. Sometimes it's better to be a team player. The implied threat lingered like a shadow as I drove to the law office of Richard Monroe, my grandmother's attorney and a family friend. His practice was housed in a converted Victorian on Main Street, its gingerbread trim and wide porch a nod to Brookhaven's earlier, less pretentious days. Richard's secretary ushered me into his wood-paneled office, where the 60-something lawyer listened with increasing alarm as I recounted the situation. He examined the forged agreement I'd photographed on my phone, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. This is outrageous, he muttered, zooming in on the signature. Margaret's M had a distinctive loop. This doesn't even come close. She'd never have signed this, especially not in hospice. He leaned back, his chair creaking. I'll send a cease and desist letter immediately, but I must warn you, Daniel, Patricia Evans has accumulated considerable power in this town. Her husband, Thomas, is on the city council. Her sister is a county judge. The HOA wields influence over local businesses. This won't be a simple matter of legal right and wrong. It's going to get political. I nodded, having sensed as much from Patricia's veiled threat. What do they stand to gain? Even with multiple bookings, we're talking $20,000 to $30,000 a year in venue fees. That's small potatoes for the risk of fraud. Richard steepled his fingers beneath his chin. It's not just about the money, Daniel. Your grandmother's property is the last large parcel in that area not under HOA control. 5 acres of green space in the middle of increasingly dense development. It's a jewel. My guess is the Heritage Sites program is a stepping stone to establishing some form of control over your land, whether through legal pressure or public perception. He rummaged through a file cabinet and handed me a thick folder. Margaret suspected something like this might happen. She asked me to give you this if there were ever challenges to the property's independence. Inside were land surveys, original deeds, and a letter from the city, dated a year before her death, confirming that attempts to rezone the property or claim it through eminent domain had been rejected. There were also notes in Margaret's precise handwriting, detailing her interactions with the HOA over the years, offers to buy the land, suggestions of partnerships, all firmly declined. She knew they'd come for it, I said softly, feeling a pang of connection to my grandmother's foresight. Richard nodded. Margaret was nobody's fool. She left you not just the property, but the ammunition to defend it. As I drove home, my mind churned with possibilities. The cease and desist letter would establish a legal position, but it wouldn't address the immediate issue of the Prescott-Winslow wedding, now just 3 weeks away. And something told me Patricia Evans wasn't going to back down easily. She had too much invested in this scheme, financially, socially, and politically. Back at the farmhouse, I walked the property, seeing it with fresh eyes. Not just as my grandmother's beloved home, but as a coveted asset others were scheming to control. The gardens, even in their neglected state, were breathtaking. Spring bulbs pushed through the soil in chaotic profusion, their colors a promise of what could be. The gazebo, though peeling, stood gracefully at the heart of what had once been a rose garden. I could see why brides would be drawn to this setting, but that didn't justify trespass or profiteering. As evening fell, I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the fading light. My thoughts were interrupted by the rumble of a beat-up blue pickup pulling into the driveway. A tall, wiry man in his 70s emerged, moving with the deliberate grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime working the land. I recognized Henry Vaughn, my grandmother's groundskeeper, who'd retired shortly before her death. Heard you were having trouble with the Evans woman, Henry called as he approached. News traveled fast in small towns. Mind if I join you? I gestured to the empty chair beside me, and Henry settled in with a grunt. Your grandmother would be spinning in her grave if she knew what they were pulling, he said without preamble. He declined my offer of bourbon but accepted a glass of water. They started small, complaints about grass height, branches over the property line. Then came letters about community standards and how the gardens could be a shared resource. His weathered face creased with disgust. Margaret told Patricia to pound sand, in those exact words. I was standing right here when she said it. I smiled, picturing my genteel but fierce grandmother delivering that line. So they escalated to forging her signature and selling access to the property, I mused. The question is, what do I do about the Prescott wedding in 3 weeks? Henry took a thoughtful sip of water. You've got 3 options. 1. Let it happen and fight the bigger battle later. 2. Get your lawyer to shut it down and deal with the fallout from a furious bride and 200 guests. Or 3. His eyes twinkled with mischief. Find a creative way to make sure nobody wants to have their fancy wedding here. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What did you have in mind? Henry chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. Your grandmother always said, sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable people is to be spectacularly unreasonable yourself. Make it memorable. Over the next hour, Henry filled me in on the local politics I'd missed during my years away. Patricia Evans had transformed the once reasonable Brookhaven Estates HOA into her personal fiefdom, using increasingly draconian rules to force out homeowners who challenged her authority. The Heritage Sites program had begun with legitimately registered historic buildings, their owners willingly participating. But as the program grew profitable, properties were added without proper permission, always under the guise of preserving community character. The funds, Henry noted, seemed to disappear into administrative costs. Most folks are too intimidated to fight back, he said. Patricia's husband, Thomas, can make life hell for local businesses through selective code enforcement. Her social circle includes every influential person in town, judges, council members, business owners. They close ranks. He drained his glass and stood to leave. But your grandmother taught me something, bullies only hold power when people are afraid to challenge them. And Margaret Carter's grandson shouldn't be afraid of the likes of Patricia Evans. As his truck vanished down the driveway, I felt a surge of resolve. I wouldn't just defend my property, I'd make such a spectacular example of Patricia's overreach that she'd never dare try this again. And I'd document the saga for my YouTube channel, HOA Tales Unraveled. Subscribe for stories of standing up to petty tyrants like Patricia. The next morning, a response arrived from the HOA's attorney, not Patricia herself. The letter acknowledged my ownership but insisted the heritage sites agreement was binding due to Margaret's signature, and warned that disrupting planned events could lead to lawsuits for breach of contract and damages. Richard called to discuss, but I was already forming a plan, one requiring precise timing and theatrical flair. Hold off on responding, I told him. I have an idea that'll solve this more effectively than a legal battle. My first step was research. I dove into Emily Prescott's online presence, discovering she was a realtor with the agency that handled most of Brookhaven Estate's property transactions. Her fiancé, David Winslow, was a developer whose company built the newest section of the HOA community.